This is GARIS, Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 320, entitled Accepting the Price I Pay for My Masculist Misogyny Against Fluffy Parasites and Fluffy Feminist Hypocrites. Description. This flyer expresses my resignation towards the fact of my universal rejection by women of my masculist misogyny towards fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites. I will very probably live the lifestyle of the MGTOW monk for the rest of my life, before masculism is widespread enough in the culture so that there are enough female masculists for the masculists. That will take a decade or more. So guys, be conscious that if you come out publicly as a masculist, that is the price you will pay until the masculist movement can force women to understand masculist MGTOW ideas. The flyer itself. Accepting the price I pay for my masculist misogyny against fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites, by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I have now more or less accepted that I will not be able to date any Oz, in brackets slang for Australian, women, because they cannot stomach my misogyny against fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites. Some months ago, after only a few weeks in the country, having lived 12 years in China, my sister, after listening to me talk about the core ideas of masculism and my plans for Oz in that direction, told me, quote, "No Oz woman will date you because of your masculism," end quote. After nearly 5 months in Oz now, her prediction has come true, more or less. I did date a Russian woman for a few months who lied to me about her age by a whopping 7 years, which made her too old to have been influenced by feminism in Russia, where she lived until she was nearly 50. So feminism was not a thing for her, but she had traditional expectations of men, that men should treat her like a princess snowflake, which annoyed the hell out of me, so we parted. Recently, I asked my sister, "You remember some months back you predicted that I'd be unable to date any Oz women due to my masculism. You were right, so why did you make that prediction? What is it about my masculism that so turns Oz women off, in your opinion?" End quote. She answered straight back in her characteristic style, "Your misogyny." I thought, yes, I'm definitely misogynist against fluffy parasites whom I hate and see as the moral equivalent of slavers of Negroes in the 1800s in the US. I also have a masculinist hatred for fluffy feminists whom I see as hypocrites, behaving as feminists in the parliaments but as fluffy parasites in the divorce courts. It's bad enough that they are fluffies in their expectations of men, seeing men just as cash machines, but they are hypocrites as well, making them worse than fluffies. As a masculist, a men's libber, I want to see these two categories of women exterminated by seeing them killed, that is, killed slowly, by men forcing them to rot on the shelf to extinction, by men totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, placing enormous moral pressure on them to FIP up, that is, become FIPs, financially independent persons, who expect to behave as responsible adults and not parasite off the money of a man the way fluffies do. Fluffies are vermin to masculists, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin to be wiped out, which is one of the primary goals of the masculists. We men are nearly all FIPs, so have the financial power to force women to FIP up, or they rot on the shelf. A fluffy can only be a fluffy if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave who's prepared to work for her. so she can sit on her big fat ass in a middle-class house to raise her kids in and have the whole caboodle paid for by her man-slave. And to keep him at the grindstone, she gives him a bit of sex now and then. Fluffy feminists are even more hated by the masculists due to their hypocrisy, expecting women to have equal rights with men as feminists, in parentheses, and as a masculist, I have no problem with that, since equal rights for women is a masculist prerequisite for women to be able to fip up effectively, close brackets. But reject equal obligations with men by not bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, ending up with a fluffy crap diploma that the economy does not value, and then looking around for some manslave in her 30s when her biological clock is ticking, giving her baby rabies. To be able to appreciate this masculinist viewpoint, this hatred of fluffies and fluffy feminists, one needs to have had one's masculist consciousness raised. That is, to have become aware, that is conscious, of how immoral, how parasitic fluffies are. A century or more ago, women had a string of kids with no contraception, and thanks to higher hygiene standards, for example, sewage systems in the cities, these many children survived at greater odds. So mothering was definitely a full-time job. The Industrial Revolution and the factory system killed off the multi-generational family, forcing the creation of the nuclear family, mom, dad and the kids, due to its greater mobility to follow jobs in the factories, which often went bankrupt. With mum totally occupied with the kids, dad was forced into the sole breadwinner role, and if he failed to bring home the bacon, he and his family starved. There was no welfare state in those days, no health insurance, no unemployment insurance, no trade unions, no labour political parties. Life was brutal. Boys were harshly socialised to be tough, to be able to bounce back as a man the day after he got fired so that he could keep bringing home the money for his family. Women relied on their and their children's survival on the father, the husband. Throughout history, women's very survival has depended on men bringing home male-hunted meat, or more recently, money. But men, with their 10% larger brains than women, due to women's hypogamy, in brackets, that is, the female instinct to mate up, that is, with a superior male, so that her kids could benefit from his superior DNA, close brackets. Invent everything, build everything, create everything. Men gave women the contraceptive pill, the greatest social revolution in history. Men also gave women household gadgets, higher education, a life expectancy well into the 80s due to male-invented modern medicine, etc., so that women can reliably choose the number of kids they want, which today is typically 0, 1 or 2. So even those women who have their 2 kids still have a career window of about half a century. The masculists are now standing up and pointing the finger at women, putting strong moral pressure on them to fip up, saying to women, now that you women can work, you must work. Anything else is parasitism of men's labour, that is man-slavery. Man-slavery is slavery. Slavery rouses passions. Slavery is a war issue. Therefore, man-slavery is a war issue. And the masculists are at war with the fluffies, aiming to wipe them out, to exterminate them slowly by totally ignoring them, forcing them either to fip up or to rot on the shelf to extinction. End quote. Most women don't feel this moral obligation on them coming from the masculists because they know nothing about masculism. The broadcast media in Western countries have yet to take up the masculist message and spread it to the masses, the millions, the billions. By reason of cultural inertia, women still see men as cash machines and have a conscious or unconscious expectation that men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. This attitude is deeply ingrained in women, and they are shocked when they hear masculinist rhetoric for the first time. They freak out. Women have yet to have their masculist consciousness raised, that is, to learn to see fluffydom as manslavery, and hence as a gender crime, to be punished by men, and later by society in general, as masculist ideas, masculist attitudes spread throughout the culture. Imagine you are a young woman in your early 20s, living in one of the cotton-belt southern states of the US in the 1830s. Assume you are of average intelligence and see Negro slaves all around you. You do not question the ethics of the Negro slave system because it is a daily occurrence for you. When you drive to town on your horse and buggy, you see the Negro slaves in the fields picking cotton and you don't give it a second thought. You have grown up with this sight, so it is unconsciously normal for you, unquestioned. Then suddenly in town, you come across your first abolitionist, a Yankee from the North, who's behaving like a madman, saying such crazy things as, quote, "Slavery is a moral abomination. The Negroes should be set free and be paid for their labor." Later, the Northern abolitionists who wanted to abolish Negro slavery became more militant. The infamous John Brown, of John Brown's body lies a mouldering in the grave, but his soul goes marching on, raided an armory to supply guns to the Negro slaves, and this jolted the South to secede from the Union so that the South could continue its slave system that its economy was based on. You're probably seeing where I'm going with this. Masculists see manslavery just as morally abominable as the abolitionists in the 1800s in the US saw Negro slavery. The abolitionists of the 1800s wanted to abolish Negro slavery. The masculists of the 21st century want to abolish man slavery by forcing all women to fip up or be punished. If you're able to think along these lines and agree with its sentiments, then you have had your masculist consciousness raised. But there are many other masculist issues as well, besides manslavery to fluffy parasites. The most blatant example of sexual discrimination that exists is not against women, but against men, namely the lack of the paternity rejection right, which would give men the legal right to reject an unwanted pregnancy in the same way a woman has, that is, the maternity rejection right, aka, that is also known as abortion right. With the legislated para, a man could fill in a government paternity rejection form so that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, she becomes fully responsible for the costs of the kid. If she's a FIP, then she can afford to raise it on her own money, which is one of the reasons why masculists put such enormous emphasis on the creation of a FIP society, in which all adults are FIPs. So girls are socialized by parents and taught by teachers to FIP up or be punished by men by not getting one. Millions of women commit gender crimes in the form of lying to their boyfriends/husbands about taking the pill, get pregnant, and then force the unwilling father to pay for a kid he doesn't want. This is criminality on a massive scale, enslaving a man, abusing him horribly, that millions of women do on a daily basis. Men are far more abused by women than vice versa. Women manslave men, treat them as cash machines, forcing them into undesired paternity, etc. Masculists are, mostly, men who say no to all this and put their male foot down and say, quotes, "Enough is enough. It's time for men's lib. And you women who abuse men will be punished by being totally ignored by men. And as masculist ideas spread through the culture, women too will see such fluffy parasites, such female gender criminals as vermin to be wiped out." End quote. The problem for me personally is that I'm pretty much the father of masculism. It's my term, coined in the early 70s when I was an avid male feminist, hoping that feminism would make women interesting. That is, capable of sharing my intellectual passions of pure math, physics, and philosophy, but that never happened. I have given this new ism most of its concepts and their labels. In parentheses, see the extensive glossary in my Masculism book, whose link can be found on my website. You can download it for free. But there's a price to be paid for being a masculist in the early days of its existence, and that is that until the broadcast media take up these ideas and run with them, then women will remain ignorant of masculist ideas. It took feminism several decades to spread from the sages, that's intellectuals, pioneering second-wave feminist ideas in the 60s, to reach the working class female masses today. Masculist ideas will probably take decades to spread as well. When I make my masculist videos and lash out at fluffies and fluffy feminists, those women who have contacted me or vice versa on our e-dating site are appalled at my masculist views. All they see after decades of feminist rhetoric that it is taboo for men to criticize women, to abuse women. Then, not surprisingly, these women reject masculism and most definitely masculists who present these views. I do believe, however, that as masculist ideas spread to the millions, that there will be women who sympathise with the gender plight of males, that is, who become female masculists, the way many men sympathise with the plight of the second-wave feminists who wanted equal access to the professions, etc., and became male feminists. But it's too soon for the existence of large numbers of female masculists. So for me personally, nearly every woman who contacts me or vice versa on our common e-dating site drops me like a hot potato the moment she learns I'm a masculist who hates fluffies and fluffy feminists. These women have not had their masculist consciousness raised. So I'm paying the price of the pioneer. Other early masculists who express similar ideas on the media, on the internet, will suffer a similar fate, I strongly suspect. In my own case, I'm in my 70s, so the loss of sex that such female rejection implies will not impact on me as strongly as it would on a younger man. It's true that I'm misogynist towards most women, especially against fluffy parasites and fluffy feminist hypocrites, but to some extent towards all women, because virtually all women are incapable of enjoying and contributing to my intellectual passions of pure math and math physics. In math and physics terms, I see women, nearly all women, as fuckwits, and that is just a fact, as shown clearly by the scientific evidence. I have about 2,000 e-books on PhD and research level pure math. Literally only a handful of them are written by a woman. So it appears that I will probably live the life of a MGTOW monk for the remaining 3, hopefully, decades of my life, and that I will live out the rest of my life being condescending towards women in those terms. That is, being unable to share my intellectual passions with the female mind that I see as childish and 10% smaller brained, as again shown by science. These are just facts that women will have to accept, or be accused by masculist scientists like me of being iscyanate fairies. Iscyanate equals ignorant of science, unable to think scientifically. Fairy equals living in a fairyland, believing what you want to believe without evidence, making you no better than a religionist or a flat earther. But I'm not condescending towards all women. There is a category of women I enjoy being with and admire, whom I label sage fips. Sage equals intellectual, thinker. Fip equals financially independent person. For example, I'm a member of a university professor book club at Melbourne University and enjoy the company of the smart women there, and I get the impression the feeling is mutual, but they don't know about my masculism. About once a week, I'm sent by my e-dating company a female contact who has a PhD, so that attracts me. But when I give them the masculist test, they fail it universally. None of them are yet female masculists. All they hear, thanks to decades of feminist rhetoric, is an angry male lashing out at women. They don't stop to think and put themselves into the shoes of men who are being so abused by women. For example, in the divorce courts, no para, manslavery, financial parasitism, female gender crimes, etc. It would require a creative leap on their part to put themselves into the shoes of a man, seeing the world with a masculist perspective. So of course they can't, so they don't. These rejecting PhD'd women annoy me for their lack of sympathy towards men. They know nothing of masculism, so are unable to think masculist thoughts. They are exclusively monoconscious feminists who have been taught by feminism that men who lash out at women are to be rejected by women rather than understood, which is why I predict, in parentheses, see an earlier flyer of mine on this, that in the coming decade or so, tens of millions of Western women will go through a lot of pain by being rejected by men, for not adapting to men's growing masculist anger at women for the way women oppress men, and badly so, more so than men oppress women. So until there are many female masculists, I've resigned myself to living the life of a MGTOW, that's men going their own way, monk, devoting my time and energy to my intellectual interests, pure math, math physics, by making 120 plus YouTube lecture courses on these topics for master's and PhD level students around the world for free, as well as making e-libraries with Google links to full content textbooks in these topics. It will probably take another decade before there is a non-negligible supply of female masculists. So any masculist like myself who comes out, that is, expresses his masculist views in public, can expect the same treatment as I'm getting, that is, total female rejection, which only increases the level of contempt coming from masculists against the hypocrisy of women, who feel it's okay for women as feminists to lash out at how men oppress women, but it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for how women oppress men. It will take a decade of masculist consciousness raising to produce a crop of female masculists to create a supply of such women for hetero masculists. I know what it's like to have a good relationship with a woman. From observation, I would say that about 1/10 of marriages are happy. Of course, half of them end in divorce, and a high proportion of the survivors are just so-so, passable, joyless, sexless. But I do see about 1/10 of old couples who genuinely enjoy each other's presence and smile at each other with deep contentment. I had that with my first wife for the first 5 years before the kids came, which put a spanner in the works. Since she was a fluffie, I was pushed into the man-slave role and hated it. The marriage soured. I lost my kids and 6 years of my life. I would like a bit of pleasant female company to experience female nurturing that women can be so good at if they choose to offer it to a man. But probably for the rest of my life, I will just have to accept being a MGTOW monk and to learn to live with it. My father has been like that for 3 decades and seems quite happy, so I hope I'll be the same. So, guys, be conscious of the price you will pay if you go public with your masculism. Women are still monoconscious feminazis. They know nothing of masculism. It's our job to teach them, to force them to stop oppressing men, to convert them into being female masculists. Courage! Cheers, Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. And in brackets, contains links to 300 plus YouTube and Minds and BitChute, masculist essays/videos, and to the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Manslaves to Women, an e-textbook of 300 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Ciao.